Greetings brothers, today we're talking army lists, and this video is going to break down how to build a strong Strike Force 2000 point Blood Angels army list in 9th edition. Welcome to the weekly tactics video. I'm John, the Blood Angels commander, and every week on this channel we do multiple videos designed to help you be both a better Blood Angels player and a better tactician. So if that's something you're interested in, please consider subscribing. So in this video we'll be going over 6 different things, and you can see the list right here. We'll start with list goals, then detachments and upgrades, followed by strategies and secondaries. Then we'll have a look at some of our chapter strengths and weaknesses, followed by like a deployment and game plan section. We'll round up everything with a charge from Deepstrike section, and then we'll talk about next steps. So if you're new to Warhammer 40,000, or you're sort of getting back into 9th edition, or if you've not even managed to play much 9th edition due to the pandemic, then 9th edition is a very different game from 8th. And I think the thing about 9th edition is there's a very tactical element of holding primary objectives, and that's across every mission, and also scoring your secondaries. Obviously these are the two things that get you victory points, so they cannot be understated just how important they are in the game. All missions in 9th edition have like 4 to 6 objectives on them, and if you can consistently score 10 points per battle round, so that would be battle round 2, 3, 4 and 5 for your primaries, then you have a good chance to set yourself up for a strong position to essentially win the game. That gives you 40 points if you scored the 10 points in those 4 turns. Troop choices are generally strongest for scoring objectives in that they do have the objective secured rule, and it means that a single objective secured troop or unit can essentially hold an objective against multiple enemies if none of them have the objective secured rule. Now most of the maps on 9th edition will have an objective in your deployment zone, or a couple maybe near your deployment zone. Now I would call these your backfield objectives, and you need to consider having a unit that can hold these effectively. Now to get maximum points in your primary, you only need to score those 15 magical points for a single battle round, and so to do that you don't need to overcommit troops. You should definitely just focus primarily on getting those 10 points every round. If you get 10 points every round on your primaries, you're probably going to be set up in a reasonable position to win the game. So don't spread your army too thin, don't throw away units unnecessarily, and just evaluate the map before you make your moves. Remember, a single turn of scoring 15 points on your primaries will get you the full 45 points and cap if you manage to get those 10 on the other 3 turns. Now for secondaries, I'm going to give you the same advice. Do not pick greedy secondaries. Usually when you pick greedy secondaries, you end up scoring badly or poorly. So when you're picking your secondaries, look for secondaries you think you can score 10 points from. If you can score those 10 from the primaries and 10 from the secondaries, anything over that is a real bonus, and you're straight away at 70 out of 90 points. Even if you aren't winning the game at that stage, you're going to be able to compete right up to the final turn. And I mean, I think that is the goal. If you're in that final turn and you have a chance to win the game, then it's up to you whether you take it or not. But pick like the percentage play. Don't pick a risky objective that you think, oh well, maybe if I kill the Titan, for example, I can get more points. Pick something that you're going to score realistically every turn and build up points that way without endangering too many of your models. And then the final thing to think about is, once you have this list and the goals and you know what you're trying to do, I would just say make sure that every action you do in the game is always taken with your objectives in mind. Maybe you really want to kill Unit X because they've always been a threat to you and you hate them. Maybe it's the War Master himself is on the battlefield, right? But no, I mean, just think about your objectives. Does it advance the correct agenda? If it doesn't, then it's probably not the right play. So building a list in 9th edition though, let's start with that and talk about detachments. So a lot of people would recommend the battalion detachment. That is very common, and I guess if your warlord is part of the battalion detachment, then you essentially get those CP refunded. So you would start the game with 12 CP. The battalion detachment requires 2 HQ, 3 troops. Then you have the option of like 3 HQ, 6 elites, and I think elites are really, like HQ and elites are really the core of the Blood Angels army right now. Our characters The ones that we can build with the chapter command are super strong, and obviously elites are like our Death Company, our Sanguinary Guard, our Vanguard Veterans. If you didn't watch last Tuesday's video about Vanguard Veterans, you need to watch them because they are performing really, really well right now. So other strong elite units at the moment are Dreadnoughts, Aggressors, Blade Guard Veterans, the Company Champion. I mean, the list goes on. It can be hard to pack all your elite choices into just 6, especially if you're thinking multiple Sanguinary Guard, multiple Vanguard Veterans. So the other option that I've given you here is to take a patrol detachment, put your Warlord in there, and you need 1 troop, 1 HQ for the patrol detachment. You'll get your CP refunded, and then spend 3 of the 12 that you're starting with on a Vanguard detachment. The Vanguard detachment must have 1 HQ and 3 elites, but if you do that, you essentially then give yourselves the option for 4 HQ and 8 elites. You don't have to take as many troops either. You just need to take 1 troop squad, which can be a little bit unadvisable because, like we talked about, troops do have objectives secured and that can be very valuable. But if you want to create an army list that is all about killing and full of elite power, then the Vanguard plus a patrol definitely seems like a good option. Now, by picking either of these choices, I've listed on the screen exactly how many units of each type you would be able to take with these detachments, and I think this really gives you a great degree of flexibility. And then just remember, for every infantry unit included in each detachment, you can take dedicated transports if you so want to. One thing that I've noticed since the new Blood Angels Codex came out is we really aren't the CP hungry army we were in previous editions. Previous editions, you might be using Upon Wings of Fire every turn, you might be using Descent of the Angels a couple of times a game. You know, I really feel like you could burn through, you might be using Honor of the Chapter, again, Red Rampage every turn, or you'd want to use these every turn. You could burn through all your CP, like 10 plus CP in 1 or 2 turns very quickly. Now, I've actually been starting games between like 5 and 7 CP, so I guess I would have between 10 and 12 over the course of the game because you do get 1 back every turn. And I've been ending and winning games with 3 or 4 CP left. So I really feel like starting the game now with between 5 and 7 CP is totally fine for Blood Angels. And if you do that, then what that means is, if you did take the battalion or the Vanguard and the patrol, you really have a bunch of CP you can spend on Heroes of the Chapter, Relics of the Chapter, Angels Exemplar, and or Angels Ascendant. And I guess in future weeks I'm going to be previewing one of my really strong 9th edition army lists, and you'll see that I believe I start with 5 CP and I am doing the Patrol and Vanguard trick, so I am spending 4 CP on additional Warlord traits and additional relics before the game begins. So real quick, at the bottom of the slide I've put some of the Warlord traits and relics that I use commonly in multiple games, and I get great value out of these. If you're not 100% sure which ones to put on which characters, then you can either join the Facebook group below and ask me directly or leave me a comment. On the other option would be to watch some of the other videos in my tactics playlist. We do loads of great videos, and if you haven't seen the Chapter Master on a bike versus Commander Dante, then that one just shows you the sheer power that we get with the new rules from the Space Marine Codex in 9th edition. So when it actually comes to the battle, the mission is rolled, the objectives are placed, the terrain is set up, and then you would pick up your secondary objectives. And I guess at this point, it's kind of possibly some of the most important decisions in the game, because you pick bad secondaries, it can basically hinder you or even cripple you throughout the rest of the game. So picking your secondaries, you know, I've taken 10-15 minutes to pick my secondaries. That's maybe a bit excessive, but I really wanted to win the game, and it was a casual game that we were testing armies. But take a few minutes and think long and hard about the secondaries, and I've listed a few secondaries here, and we'll run over each of them quickly, and I'll tell you why I think they're a good choice as it currently stands. So within the battlefield supremacy category, there's 2 that really stand out to me. Engage on all fronts is the secondary for having a unit out with 6 of the middle, but each of the 4 corners or quadrants of the board. And this is like a really simple one to score. If you're in 3 quadrants, you get 2, and if you're in all 4 quadrants, you get 3. And I guess in multiple games that I play, it's very easy to score beyond 10, right? If you think about it, if you hold your own 2 quadrants that you deployed in, usually, you just need units in 1 other quadrant. You can do that with a single unit, a jump pack unit, a unit that advances, a transport, a drop pod, you know, a single unit into one of those other quadrants, you start picking up 2 at the end of your turn. And late in the game, as the battle gets, you know, strung out and spaces are created, you can easily drop down a drop pod unit, a Deepstrike unit, sorry, into any of the other quadrants, instantly scoring you 3 at the end of your turn every time. And then another way that sometimes happens with this, I often talk about like a jump pack unit with 1 guy left in it. You know, if you lose everything out of a unit except maybe 1 guy, maybe you just pay the 2 CP to auto pass the morale, and then you just fall back into a board quadrant, into an obscuring position, advance and hide in a corner of the board that you've not got much else there. And then, you know, that one random guy scored you points throughout the rest of the game. And I guess similar thing could be said for both Linebreaker and Relentless Assault, and these are both objectives that are scored by having units in the enemy deployment zone, map dependent. On some of the maps where the deployment zones are large, maybe your opponent is a melee army that needs to push forward, you can easily drop something into the opponent's deployment zone and keep it there for multiple turns. On this one, you score 4 per turn. So you only need to do 4 turns to maximise your points. But honestly, 3 turns and 12 points, if our goal was to get 10 points for every secondary, then that's a very easy one to pick up the 10 points from. Map dependent, of course. So for No Mercy, No Respite, the first one just to mention, and it's definitely a niche pick, is Thin Their Ranks. Against enemies such as Necrons or Death Guard with a lot of Poxwalkers, for every 10 models you kill, and this obviously counts for reanimating Necron models, you would get 1 victory point. Any model with 10 or more wounds would also grant 1 victory point, but I mean, I recently played against a list that had 80 Necron warriors in it, and we killed all of them, so them alone would have probably given 10 to 12 victory points with all the reanimation from 80 warriors. So you can see in some cases Thin the Ranks can be a very strong pick if you think that they have a lot of chaff units that you're going to end up killing. Next up is Oath of Moment, and Oath of Moment is a great secondary. It's scoreable, or it's found in the Space Marine Codex, and what it is if you do not fall back and do not fail a leadership test every turn, you get 1 VP. If you kill a character, monster, or vehicle every turn, you get 1 VP. Then if you have any unit wholly within 6 of the middle, at the end of the battle round, you get 2. Now, it's very easy not to fail a leadership test or not fall back. With Space Marines, I feel like you either fall back once per game maybe, or 1 leadership test per game, so that's an easy 4. You also, usually most rounds, let's say 3 rounds out of 5, you kill a character, vehicle or monster. Obviously you can do that more often, but you know, that's an easy 3. So then at that point you just need a single unit in the middle, within 6 of the middle, wholly within, once in the game, and you've got 9 VP. So I really love Oath of the Moment. I might find myself I get to score a lot of points on that every game, so definitely consider that. And then there is obviously the new Blood Angels one, which is Death from Above, and this will synergize very nicely if you have deep striking lists. It'll synergize even nicer if you have that turn 1 drop pod coming in as well. So consider that. But my preference at the moment really is Oath of Moment. It works against a lot of different armies, and it's a very solid one. Like I talk about having those solid 10 points. I don't think I've ever picked Oath of Moment and scored less than 10. Now there's 2 in Purge the Enemy, and they're both interesting but also difficult in their own way. So we've got Assassinate and we've got Bring It Down. Assassinate is all about killing enemy characters, and it's 3 points for each one, and Bring It Down is all about killing enemy vehicles, and it's like 1, 2 or 3 based on the number of wounds that the vehicle has that got FAQ'd recently. So against a vehicle heavy list, again, Bring It Down is a situational niche pick that will be pretty decent, and against a character heavy list, Assassinate also can be very decent. I guess the one thing to say about both of these is, remember, Blood Angels armies are primarily melee, so if you can't get into melee with said characters or vehicles, this could actually hurt you. So just make sure before you pick either of these that you think, you know, are these vehicles killable, and if they're not, then, you know, avoid them at all costs. So shadow operations can be a little bit map specific, and the ones that I like to look at are then raise the banners, and this works best on maps with 5 or 6 objectives, and what you do is with an infantry model within one of those objectives can essentially perform an action to raise a banner. This finishes at the end of the turn, your turn, and then at the start of the next command phase, and once again at the end of the game, you will score 1 VP for every banner that you have. The banner will remain on the objective until the enemy controls that objective at the start of any phase. So deploy scramblers is sort of an easy one to do, and you can do it with a single 2-man squad of company veterans, for example, once in your deployment zone, once in the enemy's deployment zone, and once in the no man's land in the middle of the map, 6 inches from either deployment zone. You perform the deploy scramblers action. It completes at the end of your turn, so I guess unless you get heroically intervened into, it will always complete once you start the action. If you do it in all 3 areas, then you get a nice easy 10 victory points. And then lastly, repair the teleport homer is a little bit risky, but it does synergize with something like Linebreaker or Relentless Assault, where if you have an infantry unit in the enemy deployment zone, they can perform an action, but it will not be completed till your next command phase, and if you do that, you get a flat 4 victory points. So I guess like if you were going to drop a drop pod down and you just maybe had a 2-man company veteran squad with storm shields and you were happy for them to just chill out next to the drop pod and perform actions, I mean it's just a 50-point model, you could use that to great advantage to score some points. So those are some of the objectives that I commonly pick, so let's move on to strengths and weaknesses of Blood Angels sort of chapter as a whole. So just thought I'd start by listing our 2 chapter tactics, and I'm sure everybody knows this, but we do have Red Thirst that gives us +1 to charge rolls and +1 to advance rolls, and then it also gives us +1 to wound when we're charged, or we're charging, or we heroically intervene. And then our second chapter tactic essentially is Savage Echoes. So when the Assault Doctrine is active on a unit, we also get +1 attack when the unit is charging, charged, or heroically intervened. So the way these 2 rules really synergize is that first round of combat, or if other units are charging in to join combat, we will be very deadly. And also the heroic intervention thing is nice, especially in that Sanguinary Guard do have that strat for 1 CP to perform a heroic intervention, and you can do some really good plays with Sanguinary Guard deployed in obscuring cover near objectives. Enemies move on to the objective, heroically intervene 6 inches into them with a Sanguinary Guard, and with the new rules, because the enemy didn't charge, you essentially get to fight first in 9th edition. So this is a very powerful counterplay to consider, and it syncs up really well with our chapter tactics. So we talk about the raw strengths that I see with the Blood Angels right now is any single unit, doesn't matter if it's a Sanguinary Guard to a Tech Marine, every unit can be devastating in close combat. What with potentially to get 2 additional attacks, 1 additional AP, and then the +1 to wound means even unarmed scouts or scouts with knives, for example, I've seen killing models left, right and centre. It's a very, very strong synergy once we get past those first 2 turns. Obviously we also have the ability for lots of our units to arrive from Deepstrike, such as Death Company, such as characters, Sanguinary Guard, Vanguard Veterans. All these guys can arrive and then make key charges throughout the battle. We also have the Assault Doctrine that can be now activated from turn 1 with the use of the Sanguinary Priest, so we can get those additional attacks and additional AP right from the very beginning of the game, and especially with like a Death Company that can now do a 12-inch pre-game move, you can daisy chain some of them back to the Sanguinary Priest. I guess they're next to him could be a Chapter Master, so we can give Death Company full rerolls and the ability to have Savage Echoes from turn 1. That would give each chainsword within the Death Company 6 attacks, and these guys could be 24 inches forward in your first turn, setting up a charge against just about anything. And the final thing is, like, we really have access to so many models now. I mean, people joke at how many models there are in the Space Marine Codex. Well, we obviously have our Blood Angels Codex as well, so being Codex compliant now, there's almost no end to the models that you need to buy or you can take to make a strong Blood Angels army. So with all that said, there are some weaknesses to the Blood Angels, and we are Space Marines, so we can shoot fairly decently, but we don't really have any form of shooting buffs. We do have a BS3 and then usually like a BS2 on our characters, but out of, basic rerolls, there's no real way to buff any of our shooting. I mean, there may be some stratagems, but there's nothing army-wide. So our shooting is okay, but nothing spectacular. Next up, I think, is our Sanguinary Guard. While they are our hardest hitting close combat unit, they do not have any invulnerable save, and so they can be brought down fairly easily by high AP weapons, and they have no feel, no pain or shrug anymore, so they're a bit more vulnerable than they were, and especially against units such as Dreadnoughts or Death Guard that have the ability to -1 to the damage. Then the Sanguinary Guard actually struggle with that now that their weapons have been made flat 2 damage. So Sanguinary Guard are still very good, but we need to play them very, very tactically and use them in precisely the right positions. And in saying that, most Blood Angels army lists are going to have probably anywhere between 1,000 and 1,500 points of close combat. So good positioning and using terrain to our advantage as well are going to be key to winning games. I mean, I tend to advise people on the channel to take 400 points of shooting for Blood Angels, but some people even think that is a bit high. So yeah, terrain and cover, use it to your absolute advantage. And then a couple other things to mention is we are a bit vulnerable to any army that makes us fight last unless we bring something to counter that, and we are also maybe a little bit vulnerable against Overwatch unless of course we're in some sort of obscuring terrain and we can make those charges and prevent the Overwatch. And then the one final thing to say is our army can sometimes feel a bit predictable to enemies, so that's why it's good to maybe include something a little bit different, like that utility librarian, or maybe a whirlwind or something to give some suppression fire, because enemies will expect us to be charging. They can set up screens, they can hide characters, like I said earlier in the video about Assassinate, they can hide all their characters behind giant screens of chaff and you're just not going to be able to get to them. So we can be a bit predictable. So I mean, we have to know all these things and think about how ways we can counter them to really win games. So having a plan and doing a good deployment are things people ask me about quite often. So let's just talk about that for a little minute here. And before you do deploy, you know your missions, you know your primaries, your secondary, and then you also know your opponent's force. And then you declare in secret what is deep striking and what is going into strategic reserve. So I'd almost say don't have any preconceived notions at this point. Think long and hard about what your army is, and think about what the enemy is, and also look at the map. So we've just talked about how Sanguinary Guard are potentially deadly, but also weak. So assess the strongest enemy firepower on the board, and then look at just how much terrain / obscuring terrain is available within your deployment zone compared to, say, the footprints of your strongest or your most critical units, such as these Sanguinary Guard or maybe that turn 1 Death Company. If you aren't going to get the first turn, which you don't know at this point, is your deployment going to keep enough of your models alive to do the damage that you need to do when you do get to go? At this point as well, I'd probably try and make a strategy around your primaries, right? If it's on a map, let's just make it simple and say there's 2 primaries on one side of the map and 2 primaries on the other. Are you going to split your forces? Are you going to focus on one? Is there a way to screen one side of the map and hold the other? Because all these things are going to be important. And remember what I said, on a map with 4 objectives, we're just going to need to hold 2 for most of the game, and we're going to be in a very strong position. So think about the map, think about any screening and zoning you maybe want to do for key units, such as using infiltrators to deny deep strike, and then finally, before you actually put a single model down, also really think about what positions are going to be good for your deep strike, because there's no point putting all your units into deep strike if there's no obscuring terrain where you need them to come in. Maybe you were thinking about doing relentless assault, for example. If there's nothing in his deployment zone, are you going to be happy to come in and take a round of fire if you fail your charges? So there's a lot to think about in the deployment, and especially before you decide what is going into reserve and what isn't. And then finally, think about the secondaries that you've picked and how you're going to score them. And before you put a single model into strategic reserve or deep strike, think about the reason you're putting it into deep strike. I always put a squad, or I say always, that sounds really bad after I'm telling you never do that, but I usually put in a squad of 5-man Death Company to try and take my opponent's backfield objective. That is a stratagem that I use a lot, but there's nothing to say if I see my opponent would be able to screen out the entire backfield, then maybe I think, right, the Death Company just have to do something different. They maybe start on the board and they just do something completely different. So think about all that and then finalise essentially what is going into Deepstrike and Strategic Reserve. And then when we finally get to deployment here, look at your opponent's shooting, look at any firing arcs that there may be going to be, try and deploy really as smartly as you can out of line of sight of potential shooting threats. Also, if your opponent has the way to maybe, pre-game move and is potentially going to set up for some sort of turn 1 alpha strike, try and maybe not deploy right on the forward line. Think about just keeping out of charge distance if that's something that you maybe have to consider. And also, is there objectives that you maybe want to hold early in the game, and if so, where are they? And also, is there any cover in the objectives? And if there's not, maybe you can think about daisy chaining some sort of unit back into cover to make them a bit more survivable. I think the deployment is really important. And the final thing to just think about is also your screening. If the opponent has ways or is going to be dropping down deep strike units, then I guess you've got two options. You're either trying to screen your whole deployment zone or the important parts of your deployment zone so the deep strike things can't come in, or do you leave a space and think that, well, the deep strike's okay to come in here because I have a strong unit that could auspex scan them. You can bait and switch opponents. Sometimes what I do is I take a whirlwind and maybe I'll put it away in one corner of the map, and doing this sometimes will make the opponent think, oh, the whirlwind's exposed in the corner, I will essentially put some units down there to go get the whirlwind, and you can do some counterplays. So think smartly, but whatever you do, try and have a reason for doing it, and also try and show strength is the way that I like to play. If I try and focus on a certain number of objectives, don't spread myself too thin, and then, essentially in 9th edition you can win the game without killing a model now, right? So it's all about tactical play, precise strikes and clever retreats, I think. Now, we talked a lot just a minute ago about Deepstrike and Strategic Reserve. So one of the members of our Facebook community group, which link in the video description below, has kindly made a chart for Blood Angels showing the precise chance to make your charge if you have that 8-inch charge from the Blood Angels due to our +1, and then what it is with the reroll, and the same if it is a 7-inch charge based on using the Chaplain's Canticle of Hate. So these are your charge percentages if you come in from Deepstrike. So just be aware of that, and this is why sometimes I recommend that if you have assessed the map and you have found some obscuring terrain, maybe in the opponent's deployment zone or maybe in their backfield, then sometimes it can be good to deep strike your unit into that terrain and chill out for a turn. They're safe enough in the terrain, they can only be hit maybe by indirect fire, and they would have maybe +1 because they're in cover. So chill out for a turn and then move out 12 inches and set yourself up for a low risk charge. Sometimes you could drop down your heavy hitting Terminators 9 inches away, 65% charge with a reroll, so 2 out of 3 times, but hey, it's your unlucky time, and then they have to weather maybe a storm of fire from the enemies, and maybe you could lose that whole Terminator squad without making the charge. So sometimes you can get away with it, but sometimes it can be worth really thinking long and hard about these deep strikes and just precisely what do you need to achieve. Do you need to achieve it right now in turn 2, or if you achieved it in turn 3, would it still be good? So think about that as well, and hopefully these numbers here let you precisely decide when or where to do some deep strike and charges. So the next steps really are, we've picked our primaries, we've secondaries, we've put our units into deep strike, we've got that strong deployment, we have a game plan. So where do we go? Well, you go on and win the game, my brothers. I know you can do it. We are the strongest chapter, in my opinion. But I really hope this advice helps you think a little bit more about the beginning of the game, because I've been asked a lot about this, and this is a little bit different from my normal videos on a Friday, and I hope that you've found it useful. If you have found it useful, I'd love it if you would hit that like button, and also leave me a comment down below. The comments and the likes help the channel so much. It's unbelievable how much support you guys have shown me, so really appreciate it if you would do that. Now remember, there's no need to be greedy over primaries or in some cases even secondaries. Like, do not throw your units away relentlessly. Every move you make, have some sort of end goal, have some sort of reasoning for doing it. Use the terrain to your advantage whenever possible, and really, you know, double down on what's going to score you points. And then lastly, you know, with a solid strategy like that, I don't see why you wouldn't be able to win or improve your game, and, you know, just try and have fun and show good sportsmanship. Because if you have fun and show good sportsmanship, I think everybody at the table will have fun. And I mean, I think that is the ultimate goal. I mean, winning is great, but I mean, having fun and enjoyment is really why we're all here. So I was hoping to have a giveaway, but with the pandemic, the pre-orders seem like they're delayed a little bit, so that's fine. Hopefully it'll be next Friday. It should tie in roughly with around 4,000 subscribers, so that will be really cool. I want to say thank you for all the support, you know, people using referral links, Audible trials, becoming members. I'm kind of blown away with the amount of support the channel is gaining, so thank you very much for that. And if you would like to support in any way, shape or form, you can find a bunch of links in the video description below. So although this video is a little bit different, I'd really appreciate some feedback in the comments below. We do reply to every comment, and if you want to just chat further, then we have a Blood Angels Commander Facebook group, link in the video description, where we have about 600 members now. It's growing every day, so come hang out with us there too. We'll be back on Sunday at 4 PM GMT for the Blood Angels Army List show. We're live every Sunday and we'll look at community submitted lists. If you want to submit your list, you head over to the Blood Angels Commander YouTube channel, you find the community tab and you post the list as a comment to the latest community update, and that way I'll add you to the queue. I hope to see you all in the next video. For the Emperor and the glory of Sanguinius, by the blood are we made, brothers. Peace.